The story of Isaac Newton begins on a cold Christmas day in 1642, in the small village of Woolsthorpe by Colsterworth, in Lincolnshire, England. He was born prematurely, so tiny and frail that the midwife who attended his birth declared he would not survive the night. He could fit inside a quart pot, his mother Hannah later recalled, his body so small and weak that she could hold him in the palm of her hand. Isaac Newton was not supposed to live. Yet somehow, against all odds, he did. His father, also named Isaac Newton, had died 3 months before he was born. He was a prosperous farmer, a man of the land who had never learned to read or write. He had hoped to pass his farm to his son, but fate had other plans. When Hannah laid eyes on her newborn son, she named him after the father he would never know. It was the only inheritance he would receive. Hannah Newton was a practical woman, strong-willed and resourceful. Widowed and alone, she faced the daunting task of raising a newborn while managing a farm in the midst of a civil war. England was in chaos, torn apart by the conflict between King Charles I and Parliament. But in the quiet countryside of Woolsthorpe, life continued in its slow, steady rhythm. Little Isaac was a quiet baby, rarely crying or demanding attention. He seemed to live in his own world, observing everything around him with wide, curious eyes. His mother would find him staring at the ceiling for hours, his tiny mind already at work, puzzling over the mysteries of the world. Part 2: The Absence of a Mother. When Isaac was just 3 years old, his mother remarried. Her new husband was Barnabas Smith, a wealthy clergyman from a nearby village. The marriage brought stability and financial security, but it came at a terrible cost. Hannah moved away to live with her new husband, leaving young Isaac behind in Woolsthorpe. He was placed in the care of his grandparents, James and Marjorie Ayscough. It was a decision that would shape Isaac's character forever. The abandonment left deep scars on the young boy. He never forgave his mother for leaving him. Years later, he would write a list of his sins, confessing his anger and resentment toward his parents. "Threatening my father and mother Smith to burn them and the house over them," he wrote in his childhood notebook. Isaac was a lonely child, isolated from the warmth of a family. His grandparents were loving but elderly, unable to give him the attention he craved. The other children in the village avoided him, finding his quiet intensity strange and unsettling. He would wander the fields alone, his mind filled with thoughts that no one else seemed to share. But the solitude had its gifts. Without the distractions of family and friends, Isaac was free to explore the world around him. He observed the way the wind moved the grass, the way the sun cast shadows across the fields, the way the moon changed its shape each night. The natural world became his playground, and its secrets became his obsession. Part 3: The Boy Who Loved to Build. Young Isaac was not interested in the usual childhood games. He had no patience for running, jumping, or wrestling with the other boys. Instead, he spent his time building things: mechanical toys, windmills, water clocks, and sundials. He was fascinated by how things worked. He would take apart simple machines, studying their inner workings with intense concentration, then put them back together again. He made a working model of a windmill, complete with a tiny miller and sack of grain. He built a water clock that marked the passage of time with perfect accuracy, using nothing but stones and water. He constructed a sundial on the wall of his house, a device that would tell the time for decades to come. One of his most remarkable inventions was a small lantern that he used to study the stars. He would sit in the darkness, holding his lantern, watching the night sky with a reverence that bordered on worship. He was mesmerized by the sun, the moon, and the stars, their movements, their patterns, their eternal dance across the heavens. He dreamed of understanding their secrets, of unlocking the mysteries of the universe. His mother, Hannah, visited occasionally, bringing gifts and gentle words of encouragement. But the distance between them remained. Isaac would receive her visits with cold politeness, his heart still aching from the betrayal of her departure. He never let himself love her too much, never let himself get too close. He had learned early that love was a fragile thing, easily broken by abandonment and loss. Part 4: The School Years. In 1655, at the age of 12, Isaac was sent to the King's School in Grantham, a bustling market town about 7 miles from Woolsthorpe. It was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Isaac was not an easy student. He was stubborn, independent, and deeply suspicious of authority. The teachers found him difficult, his mind always wandering to questions that had no place in the classroom. But he was also brilliant, a natural genius that could not be contained by rules and routines. The other students did not know what to make of him. He was skinny, pale, and awkward, with a habit of staring into space for hours. He was mocked for his otherworldly ways, called names like the boy who talks to himself. But Isaac had no interest in their taunts. He was on a different path, a path that led to the stars. One of his classmates, a boy named Humphrey Babington, would later become his friend. Humphrey saw something in Isaac that the others missed: a fierce intelligence, a burning curiosity, a depth of thought that was rare for a boy his age. They would spend hours talking about science and mathematics, dreaming of a future filled with discovery. Isaac also discovered books, the great libraries of knowledge that had been collected by scholars over the centuries. He devoured everything he could find: geometry, astronomy, philosophy, history. He was particularly drawn to the works of ancient Greek thinkers, especially Euclid and Archimedes. Their ideas were the building blocks of his own, the foundation upon which he would build his theories. But school was also a place of hardship. Isaac had to work as a servant to survive, living with a local apothecary named Mr. Clark. He would clean the house, run errands, and help with the medicines. The work was menial, but it gave him access to Mr. Clark's books and equipment, a treasure trove of knowledge that he was eager to explore. Part 5. The Return to Woolsthorpe. In 1659, when Isaac was 17, his mother's second husband died. Hannah returned to Woolsthorpe, bringing her 3 younger children with her. She needed help with the farm, and she asked Isaac to leave school and come home. Isaac was devastated. He had dreamed of going to university, of pursuing his studies, of becoming a scholar. But his mother was insistent. She needed him, and he had no choice but to obey. He returned to Woolsthorpe and threw himself into the work of the farm. He tended the sheep, plowed the fields, and helped with the harvest. But his heart was not in it. He would spend his days dreaming of books and equations, his mind far away from the mundane tasks of farming. His uncle, William Ayscough, noticed the change in his nephew. William was a clergyman who had studied at Cambridge, and he recognized Isaac's brilliance. He saw a boy who was wasting his life, who was destined for something greater than a life of farming. "Let him go back to school," William urged Hannah. "He has a gift. He must study. He must go to university. He will be wasted on the farm." Hannah was reluctant, her practical nature clashing with her pride in her son. But eventually she agreed. Isaac returned to the King's School in Grantham, graduating with honors in 1661. In the summer of 1661, a thin, pale young man arrived at the gates of Trinity College, Cambridge. He was 18 years old, his clothes were worn and patched, and his pockets were empty. His name was Isaac Newton, and he was about to embark on a journey that would change the world. The journey from Woolsthorpe had been long and arduous. The roads were rough, the weather unforgiving, and Isaac had walked most of the way, his few belongings tied in a cloth bundle slung over his shoulder. But he barely noticed the discomfort. His mind was already racing ahead, filled with the excitement of what awaited him. Cambridge was a world unlike anything he had ever known. The ancient stone buildings rose against the sky like monuments to knowledge. The libraries were filled with books that he had only dreamed of reading. The professors were scholars who had spent their lives exploring the mysteries of the universe. But Cambridge was also a place of harsh realities. Isaac was a subsizar, a poor student who worked as a servant to pay for his education. He waited on the wealthy students, cleaned their rooms, and ran their errands. He was looked down upon, mocked for his country manners and his shabby clothes. He was lonely, a stranger in a strange land, far from the village where he had grown up. Yet Isaac did not complain. He was on a mission, a quest for knowledge that would define the rest of his life. He threw himself into his studies with a passion that bordered on obsession. Part 2. The Awakening of a Genius. At first, Isaac's education followed the traditional path. He studied the classics, Latin, Greek, and philosophy. He read the works of Aristotle and Plato, the great thinkers of the ancient world. He memorized the teachings of the Church, the doctrines that had shaped European thought for centuries. But Isaac was not satisfied with the old ideas. He wanted to understand the world for himself. He wanted to see with his own eyes, to think with his own mind, to discover the truths that lay hidden beneath the surface of things. His turning point came when he discovered the works of the new philosophers, Galileo, Kepler, Descartes, and Boyle. These were men who had dared to question the old ideas, who had used observation and experiment to unlock the secrets of nature. Isaac was captivated. He devoured their books, filling his notebooks with observations and questions. He began to conduct his own experiments, building simple apparatus from scraps of wood and glass. He studied the motion of the planets, the nature of light, the laws of gravity. His professors noticed the change. Here was a student who was not content to memorize the old ideas, but who was determined to discover new ones. He was brilliant, fiercely independent, and utterly unstoppable. One of his professors, Isaac Barrow, recognized the young man's genius. Barrow was a mathematician of considerable repute, and he saw in Newton a mind that was destined for greatness. He took Newton under his wing, encouraging him to pursue his studies and to share his discoveries with the world. "Newton is a man of extraordinary abilities," Barrow wrote. "He is capable of advancing the boundaries of knowledge in ways that we cannot yet imagine." Part 3. The Notebooks of Discovery. Isaac's notebooks from his Cambridge years are a treasure trove of insight. They are filled with questions, observations, and ideas, written in his small, precise handwriting. He wrote about motion, about the forces that govern the movement of objects. He wrote about light, about the nature of color and vision. He wrote about the stars, about the patterns that could be seen in the night sky. He wrote about the universe, about the vast, mysterious cosmos that stretched beyond the limits of human understanding. One of his most important discoveries came in the study of optics. He conducted a series of experiments with prisms, shining a beam of white light through a triangle of glass. He observed that the light split into a spectrum of colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. He realized that white light was not a single entity, but a mixture of all the colors of the rainbow. This was a revolutionary idea. It challenged the centuries-old belief that white light was a pure, indivisible substance. It opened up new ways of thinking about the nature of light and color. Isaac was thrilled by his discovery, but he was also cautious. He knew that his ideas would be controversial, that they would challenge the established beliefs of the scientific community. He kept his work secret, sharing it only with a few trusted friends. Part 4. The Plague Years. In 1665, the Great Plague swept through England, claiming thousands of lives. Cambridge was forced to close, and Isaac returned to Woolsthorpe, where he would spend the next 2 years in isolation. It was during these 2 years that Isaac made some of his greatest discoveries. Without the distractions of university life, he was free to explore his ideas in depth. He worked on calculus, developing the foundations of modern mathematics. He studied optics, discovering that white light is composed of a spectrum of colors. He formulated the laws of motion and gravity, laying the groundwork for his theory of universal gravitation. The legend of the falling apple is associated with this time. Isaac was sitting in the orchard at Woolsthorpe, watching an apple fall from a tree. He began to wonder why the apple fell straight down, rather than sideways or upward. This simple observation led him to question the nature of gravity, a force that would become the foundation of his most famous work. Why should the apple always fall perpendicularly to the ground? He asked himself. Is the same force that pulls the apple to the ground also responsible for the motion of the moon and the planets? He began to calculate, to test his ideas with mathematics. He realized that gravity was not a force that acted only on Earth, but a universal force that governed the motion of all objects in the universe. The same force that pulled the apple to the ground also kept the moon in its orbit around the Earth, and the planets in their orbits around the sun. It was a breathtaking insight, one that would change the course of scientific history. Part 5. The Return to Cambridge. In 1667, the plague subsided, and Isaac returned to Cambridge. He was now a Fellow of Trinity College, a position that gave him the freedom to pursue his studies without the burden of financial worry. He continued his work on calculus, developing the mathematical framework that would become the foundation of modern physics. He wrote a paper on the nature of light, setting out his theory of colors. He began work on the laws of motion, the principles that govern the movement of objects. His reputation grew. He was recognized as one of the leading mathematicians in Europe. His ideas were discussed in scientific circles, debated by scholars from around the world. But Isaac was not content with recognition. He wanted to prove his theories, to test them against the data of observation. He was a scientist, a seeker of truth, and he would not rest until he had found it. By the time Isaac Newton reached his 80s, he was already a living legend. He had revolutionized physics, invented calculus, and unlocked the secrets of gravity. He was the president of the Royal Society, a knight of the realm, and one of the most famous men in the world. But fame could not protect him from the ravages of time. Newton's health had been declining for years. He suffered from gout, a painful inflammation of the joints that made it difficult for him to walk. He had trouble with his digestion, his eyesight was failing, and his body was slowly giving out on him. In the autumn of 1724, at the age of 81, Newton's health took a turn for the worse. He was diagnosed with bladder stones, a painful condition that caused him tremendous suffering. The doctors could do little to help him. They prescribed bed rest, a strict diet, and plenty of fluids. But Newton was not a patient man. He had spent his life solving problems, and he was frustrated that he could not solve this one. His friends and colleagues visited him often, offering words of comfort and encouragement. But Newton was a private man, and he preferred to be alone with his thoughts. He spent hours staring out the window, lost in contemplation, his mind still sharp even as his body weakened. Part 2. The Final Illness. In the winter of 1726, Newton's health took a sudden and dramatic turn. He was hit by a severe case of bronchitis, a respiratory infection that left him struggling for breath. The doctors warned his family that he might not survive the winter. But Newton was a fighter. He rallied, defying the predictions of his physicians. He moved to Kensington, a quiet suburb of London, where the air was cleaner and the pace of life was slower. The move seemed to help and he regained some of his strength. But the reprieve was temporary. In January 1727, Newton's health began to fail again. The pain in his joints was unbearable and he was in constant discomfort. He slept poorly, ate little and grew weaker by the day. Despite his suffering, Newton remained remarkably lucid. He continued to read, to write, and to think. He was still working on his theories, still searching for answers to the questions that had fascinated him since childhood. His friends and family gathered around him, preparing for the worst. They knew that the end was near, and they wanted to be with him in his final moments. Part 3. The Last Days. On March 2, 1727, Newton attended a meeting of the Royal Society, the organization he had led for so many years. It was his final public appearance. He looked frail and pale, but he was determined to attend. The meeting was a success, but the effort took a toll on Newton. He returned home exhausted, his body racked with pain. He took to his bed and he would never leave it again. Over the next few days, Newton's condition deteriorated rapidly. He was in and out of consciousness, his body slowly shutting down. But even in his final hours, his mind remained clear. A doctor was called to attend to him, but there was little that could be done. The old man was dying and there was no cure for old age. On the night of March 19, 1727, Newton's pain became unbearable. He cried out in agony, his body racked with spasms. He was given a dose of opium to ease his suffering, and he drifted into unconsciousness. Part 4. The Final Moments. On March 20, 1727, Isaac Newton passed away. He was 84 years old. His death was quiet, peaceful, and without pain. He had lived a life of extraordinary achievement, and he left behind a legacy that would endure for centuries. His friends and family gathered around his bed, mourning the loss of a man who had changed the world. His nephew, who had been with him in his final hours, later wrote, "Sir Isaac Newton died on the 20th of March 1727, at about 2 in the morning. He had been ill for some time, and his death was not unexpected. He died in the presence of his family, and his passing was peaceful. He was a great man and he will be deeply missed." Part 5. The Mystery of his illness. For centuries, there has been speculation about the exact cause of Newton's death. Some historians believe that he may have suffered from mercury poisoning, a condition that would explain many of his symptoms. In the 1970s, scientists analyzed samples of Newton's hair and found that it contained high levels of mercury. This led to the theory that Newton may have been exposed to mercury while conducting experiments in his laboratory. Mercury was commonly used in alchemy, a field that Newton was deeply interested in. He conducted countless experiments in his quest to turn base metals into gold, and he may have accidentally ingested or inhaled mercury fumes. The symptoms of mercury poisoning include irritability, memory loss, and depression, all of which Newton exhibited in his later years. It is also possible that mercury poisoning contributed to his death, weakening his body and making him more vulnerable to other diseases. But the theory remains just that, a theory. The exact cause of Newton's death will never be known for certain. What is clear is that he was a man who lived his life to the fullest, who pushed the boundaries of human knowledge, and who left behind a legacy that will never be forgotten.